After the storm of betrayal and revenge, I divorced Kelly and tried to move on. But the aftermath left scars that wouldn't heal. As I watched her crumble under the weight of her actions, her life became a series of humiliations and punishments, orchestrated by her overbearing mother. Each day was a struggle for her, and though I had walked away, her suffering haunted me. This is the story of the broken woman left behind, and the twisted journey she took to find redemption, or perhaps a semblance of it. In the last video, James left Kelly and ended their marriage. Now we see how Kelly feels after the divorce. If you're here, please hit the like button and say hi in the comments. Sitting on the floor as James walked away with two women felt terrible. "You can't sit there all day. You're blocking the door," said a court officer. He looked at me with annoyance. I wanted to tell him off, but I didn't have the strength to argue. I sighed and finally stood up. I slowly walked toward the parking lot where my mother waited to take me home. Then it hit me. I had no home to go back to. I lost my house, my car, and most importantly, my husband. I felt empty inside. Those two women had taken everything from me. I thought about this as I walked out into the bright sunlight. The sun seemed to laugh at my pain. I thought I had no more tears. But when I saw James drive off, laughing with those two women, I broke down again. My mother was waiting by her car, shaking her head in disappointment. Inside the car, I didn't believe my life could get worse, but my mom was determined to prove me wrong. I sat in silence, staring out the window. My thoughts went back to earlier that day when Mom came home after talking to James. Mom had told me to sit with my legs together and look down. I was scared and kept thinking about that moment. I was so afraid Mom would storm in and find me doing something wrong. I felt helpless and just wanted to avoid her angry gaze. Also, being alone seemed worse. I knew I had nowhere to go. If I left, I'd have to sleep in the park. I tried to talk to my friends, but Carol and Pam told me to go away. Sue hung up on me without a word. Beth didn't understand what I was feeling, she just joked around. Carol yelled at me, calling me names and blaming me for ruining their lives. She said I was foolish for not controlling my husband. I felt frustrated. I didn't understand why everyone blamed me. All I wanted was a happy marriage. Was that so wrong? I felt sick as I agreed with them about those two women being trouble. My mom was right when she pulled me away from them when I was in school. I couldn't see it then. They seemed so cool. Now I realize they only knew how to use others for their own gain. I wished I could go back in time and change things. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly when Pam said James was suing the other women for ruining his marriage. I lost my focus until my mom spoke again, pulling me from my thoughts. "Kelly, when you do something, you really go all in. It's almost like you made a mess of marriage and art." I had nothing to say. I just sat there, tears streaming down my face, trying to ignore my mom's harsh words. "Your dad might have a heart attack when he hears what you did." I hoped he wouldn't get too upset. Then there was a pause, and I thought she was done. I always thought moms comfort their kids, but not mine. I had never heard her curse, so what she said next shocked me. "If he decides to teach you a lesson, don't expect me to step in." I winced when she hit me lightly on the head. "Are you listening? If I could get away with it, I'd lock you up in public for everyone to see." I shuddered at the ideas she brought up. Tears kept falling down my face. After a moment, she took a breath but continued her angry speech. "There's something James and I both want to know. What were you thinking? You clearly weren't using your head when you agreed to that silly thing. How could you not see that James was giving you so many chances to fix your problems? But no, your confused mind chose to ignore all the signs." "Stop it, Mom!" I yelled loudly, feeling my voice get rough. "I'm sorry, okay?" I choked on my words as I felt her angry gaze. Tears poured down my face. I put my hands over my ears as Mom kept on yelling. "Women often complain about men acting foolishly, but it seems you really blew that stereotype away. I guess you were dreaming about fun times instead of focusing on your marriage and how hard James was working. I'll ask you again, Kelly. What were you thinking?" Even if I could stop crying to answer her, I wouldn't know what to say. I had asked myself that same question so many times that I just kept getting more confused. "I don't know, Mom. I really don't," I whispered, as tears fell onto my shirt. I curled up tighter against the door, crying. Mom just shook her head as she parked the car. She turned off the engine and said, "Get out. I want you to change your clothes. I have an old dress you can wear, then you can help clean the house. The windows need washing and the bathrooms need a good scrub." I knew this was coming from our earlier talk. I could already forget about my plan to get my hair and nails done. I just nodded and said, "Yes, Mom," even though it hurt me deeply. I cried again as I remembered how Mom found out what I had done. I had no one to blame but myself since I had told her the truth. James didn't help by putting me on speakerphone, but that was nothing compared to what Mom was saying now. James hadn't shown her the photos, though. I was foolish to think that if I fought hard enough, he would know I loved him and not want a divorce. My lawyer told me it was better not to fight it again. I was too prideful to think about the outcomes of James showing the photos in court. I knew I was in big trouble when I saw Mom glaring at me. I wanted to disappear. That hurt a lot. It felt like James had let me down by telling my mom. When James answered the phone, I thought he might be ready to talk again. I didn't want him to hang up before I could say something. Then he asked that dumb question. "Who is it you don't want to know, Kelly?" I didn't get it until Mom spoke up. My stomach felt like ice. I just don't get men. You give them what they want and they think badly of you. You don't give them what they want and they call you names. Mom wanted to know what I was thinking. I wondered what James was thinking, too. What's wrong with wanting to have fun together? My friend Carol said that men only want one thing, and I still think that's true. All the other husbands were fine with it, but not mine. He had to be all about morals. As we walked into the house, Mom said, "You won't need any fancy clothes for a while, but I'll get you something. Until then, you can wear my old clothes that I was going to donate. I'll take you shopping for some new clothes soon, but don't get too excited. I'll get you some plain underwear and simple bras. That should last you a bit." I looked at her, shocked at the idea of wearing old clothes. "But those clothes are so out of style, Mom," I protested. She just laughed. "That's nothing. The clothes I'll buy will be worse. You'll be lucky to get to change for a shower. I might even find one of those long dresses that cover everything until you can take care of yourself. Or I could look for sacks for you to wear. You will not be wearing fancy things until you are back on your feet." Mom added that she and Dad had some blame for the trouble in my marriage. By now I was hardly listening. Mom was saying too much, and I didn't fully understand. I asked, "What does that mean?" She shook her head and pushed me through the door. "You need to start paying attention, you ungrateful child." I hated it when she called me that. "When have you ever worked for anything in your life?" "Kelly, I know your father and I gave you everything. James said he continued that, but you have no idea what it's like to fight for what you have. Well, now you will learn a lesson about humility. Saving money will do you good too." "I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that. I've been having bad dreams about the fight that keeps playing in my head when I sleep. I wake up crying, and it's hard to calm down enough to go back to sleep. I don't feel sure of anything anymore. I keep asking my mom if I did things right. She seems so confident, like she can make everyone do what she wants. I don't understand how she can be that way when she seems to have it all under control." I tried to think of her name, but it was frustrating that I couldn't remember it. I knew James called her by name. I remembered the red-haired woman was either Sally or Sarah, but this one was totally out of my mind. I found it hard to believe I wasn't paying attention. James and Mom said I never listened, but that didn't match how I saw things. Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't listen. But is it really so bad to ignore things that don't seem important? It turns out those things were really important and they affected my life a lot. I felt sick thinking that I might have been blind to everything. I couldn't handle that thought anymore, so I got up and left, feeling sad about the long walk home with my heavy bags. When I got home, I told my mom I was back. Any hope of praise vanished when she reminded me it was my job now, and I would be in trouble if it wasn't done well. She said I took too long shopping. I should have returned hours ago. Then she ordered me to go to the basement and clear out everything to the garage. "Stack it neatly so your father can get to his car," she said. Once I was done, I was to clean every surface in the basement until it was spotless. As I walked away to do what she said, Mom added, "You also need cooking lessons. Last night's dinner was hardly edible. How did James ever put up with your cooking?" I knew I was responsible for that. I rarely cooked, and James was happy to do it all. Looking down at the basement, the sheer amount of work made me realize that since I did most of the chores, Mom had too much time to think of my next punishment. Tears rolled down my face as I started working. After I dropped off some items at a charity where my mom works, I felt like I had no time for myself. When I went to my room, it was empty. I stood there, scared. Was I being kicked out too? Mom's voice pulled me back to reality. You'll find your things in the basement. Until you can show your father and me that you can behave like a normal person and not some wild animal, you don't deserve to stay in this house. I ran through the house and down to the basement, crying hard. This was the last straw. I fell to the floor, seeing everything just thrown in the middle of the room. It was going to take hours, if not days, to sort it all out. Mom made it clear that my usual chores were more important than my comfort. That meant I would be sleeping on a bare mattress on the floor for a while until I could fix the room. Months went by as I kept my head down and tried to stay out of trouble. The house had never looked so clean. I didn't do it just to please my parents, but the idea was at the back of my mind. I wanted to show them I could be responsible, but it also kept me busy and helped me stop thinking about what I had lost. Mom started to run out of chores for me, and that made me feel a bit good. I might be proving myself to her, or maybe just pushing back a little. But I knew it wouldn't last long. She came up with another idea. She decided I should help Mrs. Pascoe, a friend of hers who was much older. Mrs. Pascoe had lost her husband years ago, and her kids were far away. She had just had surgery and needed help moving around. I found myself spending all my time there just to get away from home. While I was cleaning Mrs. Pascoe's dining room, she asked me to make us both a cup of tea and take a break. I agreed and sat quietly. Then she asked me how I was doing. I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't sure how much she knew about what was happening in my life. I forced a smile, even though it felt fake. I'm good, Mrs. Pascoe. Things are going well. I was lying and felt unable to keep going. Mrs. Pascoe smiled gently. Really? She said, noticing my tears. I nodded, feeling overwhelmed. I wiped my eyes and said, I don't know how much you know about my marriage ending. It's not all my fault. I don't think I deserve all this. I choked up. I know I've hurt people, especially my mom, dad, and James. Tears began to flow again, and I couldn't stop them. Pascoe just sat there with a serious look, nodding. I know Marcy has told me everything. She's been trying to keep you busy. There's an old saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop. I've heard something like that before, but it goes, an idle mind is the devil's playground. Mrs. Pascoe smiled. There are many ways to say it, but the one I just shared is from the 12th century and comes from Geoffrey Chaucer, who was an English writer and poet. I suddenly realized that this woman wasn't just a little old lady. She had a lot of wisdom from her years. This made me feel a bit better. Was this how it felt to have a clearer head? But then I thought about something else. Mrs. Pascoe knew about my mistakes, but didn't throw it at me like others did, even though I understood why people were angry with me. The constant blame didn't help me feel better. Mrs. Pascoe treated me with respect, which made it easier for me to take her advice without feeling too hurt. I was trying to see that she really didn't like what I had done, but she was kind enough not to always bring it up. Mrs. Pascoe went on, You know, your mother has been sad since she found out you cheated on James. I've helped her a bit, but she really needs to talk to you. You both need to sit down and really talk it through, not just say some quick words. Dig deep and find out why you hurt her. Only then can you both start to heal and find peace. I looked at her kind smile. Mrs. Pascoe, I really want to talk with Mum again, but I don't know how to do it. I don't even know why I did what I did. If I talked to her now, I would only hurt her more. The pain I've caused her is too much. How can I have this talk without hurting her again? To start, please stop calling me Mrs. Pascoe. I know I'm old already, and I don't need you to remind me so often. Just call me Bev. Her face was relaxed, and I couldn't help but giggle a bit while holding back my sadness. Bev gently patted my hand and said, What I'm going to say next won't be easy to hear, but I have to say it. You're afraid of hurting your mother more. Well, let me tell you, you will hurt her. You might hurt her a lot more before this is done. There's nothing you can do now to stop that. But you have a choice. Do nothing and risk losing your family, or face the hurt you know is coming and hope for the best in the end. I sighed. There's no easy way out of this, is there? Bev shook her head. Nothing worth fighting for is ever easy, my dear. I could see some tough times ahead. I just hoped I could fix things enough to keep them from getting worse. Starting is what matters. You've begun by admitting that you were wrong, and that no one else can take the blame. I smiled sadly and glanced at the clock. Oh no, I need to get home to make dinner or Mom will be really upset. Bev chuckled. Relax, Kelly. She's not that bad. The reason you're down here is that she thinks it's time for you to get some help. I laughed as I stood up. I still don't want to mess things up. I added, can I ask you one favor? I'd like to talk more about what went wrong, if that's okay. Bev got up slowly and took her walking frame to the door. It would make me very happy to chat with you. You don't have to wait for your mom to send you. You're welcome any time. I smiled at the kindness she showed me. Thanks, Bev. You have no idea how much I needed someone to listen and give good advice. I left feeling better about my situation than I had since everything went wrong. I knew it all started the day I met Pamela and got caught up in a mess I didn't want to be a part of. I needed to figure out why I went along with it so easily. Maybe then I would have something to talk to Mom about. When Mom came home, the smell of roast beef and baked veggies filled the kitchen. She stood in the doorway for a bit before asking, So, what have you been doing while I was out? I smiled to myself. Mom seemed suspicious because I looked happier. It was funny because I didn't feel hurt by her lack of trust. It would take time to earn that back. Nothing much. I did what you asked. I watched some cooking shows while I was at Mrs. Pascoe's. They made a roast and she shared a few tips with me. I thought I'd give it a try. I turned on the oven light to check it. I hope it turns out okay. As I stood up to finish washing some knives and forks, I said, I also helped Mrs. Pascoe with her garden. She's moving a little better, but still has some trouble. I hope to go visit her every day to check if she needs help. I promise it won't interfere with my chores here. I looked Mom right in the eye and saw her surprise mix with her doubt, but she didn't push it further. Okay, great. I'll be busy for the next week or two. Keep the place clean, and I won't mind if you spend your free time down at Bev's, as long as you don't annoy her. You got that? I nodded, understanding what she meant. Sure, here's the rewritten version in simpler language. Yes, ma'am, I said, trying to sound cheerful. Mom frowned a little, but she didn't say anything. Dinner was normal, just like it had been since I moved back home. But for some reason, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. Maybe I was just in a better mood. Mom even said something nice about my roast, although she didn't go overboard with praise. Dad, as usual, didn't say a word, but he went back for more food. After that, every chance I had to visit Beverly, I took it. It had been over a year since my marriage ended badly, and one day Mom knocked on my door in the basement. I was surprised since she had never done that before. She walked right in, like she thought I didn't deserve privacy. I hadn't even had a door until last month. I came home one day and found Dad had put one in. I thanked him, but he just grumbled something under his breath and kept going. I took that as him accepting my thanks. At least he noticed me, and that was progress. Your father and I have a wedding to go to today, she said. What are your plans? She asked. I might not be seen by everyone, but I knew my parents were going to James's wedding, and it made my stomach turn. I think I'll spend the day with Mrs. Pascoe if that's okay, I replied. Mom nodded and started to leave. I could see she wanted to say more but didn't know how, so I decided to speak up. Will you give James my best wishes? Tell him I'm really sorry for what happened between us, and I'm happy to see his life getting better. I meant some of it, but not all. I didn't want James to marry someone else, but I knew he should be happy. I also knew I wasn't the one who could make that happen. Mom stopped, but didn't turn around. She looked down, deep in thought. I'm glad you said that, Kelly. I don't know if it will help James, but I will tell him. I promise, she added. I've been helping Michelle with her wedding plans. She needs help since she doesn't have any parents. Your dad is walking her down the aisle, and we're both going to be at the wedding table. I was surprised by this news, but I also understood my parents well enough to know they would do this for James. It made me a little jealous, but I understood. I know you want to help, I said. I felt uncomfortable with this news, but I tried to comfort her. Don't worry about it. You're doing the right thing. I know how much James means to you, and he cares about you. He's probably anxious about what you think of him marrying someone else. What you're doing will help him feel better, I added. Mom, can we talk again? Mom paused, but still didn't face me. I'm really sorry for everything I did. I don't know how to fix it. It hurts to see you sad about what I did. I've talked with Mrs. Pascoe, and she helped me see things in a different way. When the time is right, maybe we can sit down and I can answer your questions. Mom turned and looked at me, tears on her face. Then she hugged me tightly. When the time is right, we will know, Kelly. Until then, focus on becoming better and I'll support you. Mom, let go, I sniffed. Now I have to fix my face before your dad sees me like this. She squeezed my arm and left. I sat there for a long time, thinking about how my life had revolved around me until now. I realized being self-centered only leaves you alone when you need help. Why would anyone want to help someone who only thinks about themselves? I heard Mom telling Dad that James thanked all his friends for helping him through his tough time. I had to laugh at myself. Where were my friends when I needed them? They were nowhere. I had no real friends, just people who took from me. I had pushed away anyone who might have helped me. I worked hard for the life I had, only to find out it wasn't what I wanted. One time at the courthouse, I accused James of hurting our friends, and he said they were my friends, not his. Now, I see that most of them weren't even my friends. They just watched me struggle without offering help. Beverly was sitting on the back porch, knitting in the sunny winter morning. Good morning, Bev. You'll finish that sweater just in time for spring, I joked. Enough from you, young lady. I'm almost done. What brings you here to bother an old lady? I paused before answering, and she caught my hesitation. Oh, that's right. Your parents are off to a wedding today, she said. I nodded, feeling down. I know I deserve it, but it's still hard. Bev shook her head. That's just how you see it, Kelly. James stopped punishing you a long time ago. What he's doing now is about him moving on, just like we want you to do. Michelle and Sarah are good people. My head snapped up and I couldn't help but ask, when did you meet them? Beverly smiled. When I was in the hospital getting my hip fixed, James visited me and brought Michelle and Sarah. He's a lucky man to have two close friends who are both nice women. But I don't really agree with what I hear about their lives together. I don't think it's right, but it's not my place to judge them. Bev was frowning as she said this. For once, I agree with you, Bev, but for different reasons. I shouldn't have been surprised that James went to visit Bev in the hospital. He always cared about how others felt. That's a quality I often overlooked and took for granted. To change the topic from James and his marriage, I asked Bev about her knitting. So, are you almost done? I said. I can't believe you've been knitting for 2 weeks straight. What are you making? She looked over her glasses at me. Bed socks. Look in the box by your feet. I opened the box and saw many pairs of bed socks in all kinds of colors and patterns. Wow! Who are these for? Bev laughed. They're for the church fair next Sunday. I knit for the church winter fair every year. It's my way of giving back to the community that has helped me so much since Walter passed away. After all this time, you still miss him, right? Bev let out a deep sigh. Yeah, I miss that old grump. My eyebrows shot up at her choice of words, and she smiled. I loved him, and I still do. But we both know that husbands can drive you crazy at times. Just like wives can, she added. He called me names that hurt, and I called him some back that he wrote down for later. We had some great times, some bad times, and some really awful ones. But overall, we were good together. Bev finished one sock and started on another, glancing at me now and then. I cried on his shoulder, and he found comfort in my arms. We were a team, strong and also flexible. The best part was we always had each other's backs when it mattered most, no matter what. When he was upset, I knew if anyone else said something similar, he would have lost his temper fast. I tried to compare this to my marriage with James. I could see James reacting the same way, but I wasn't sure I would have done the same. Realizing that made me feel bad about myself. I'm sorry to say I can't say the same for me, I admitted quietly. I know, Kelly, and do you want to know why? I looked at her, feeling nervous about her answer, but I nodded anyway. Bev smiled, sensing I wouldn't like what she was about to say. Because you loved yourself more than you loved James. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It didn't surprise me, but it hurt anyway. But I loved him then, and I still do, I insisted. Bev looked me straight in the eye, but kept knitting. Her hands seemed to know what to do without her thinking. Oh, I'm sure you loved him in your own way, dear. The problem is how that love showed. You loved what James could do for you, how he treated you, but—" She paused for a moment. "That's not real love, Kelly. To love someone truly, you need to forgive their faults while admiring their strengths. Let me ask you this. Was there anything you tried to change about James?" I felt cold fear wash over me. "Well, there were things I wished I could change." Bev laughed a little. "See? Many women do this. I don't mean all women, just those who try to change their partners." "What was it that made you like James at first?" I didn't have to think for long. "He was almost the perfect husband. Funny, caring, helpful, a good provider, protective, and loving. Well, I just wished for a more exciting love life." When I said it, I noticed the look on Bev's face and thought I might have made a mistake. "So, you thought you could change him into that perfect husband without discussing it?" I cringed at how that sounded. I didn't know what to respond. "Oh dear, you fell into a common trap many people do. If you try to change one thing in a person, you can end up changing the whole person. If you change enough, you might lose what you first liked about them," she explained. I started to see what Bev meant. "You're saying I didn't think about how other parts of James's personality tied into his strong beliefs of right and wrong?" Bev nodded, laughing a little. "Yes, and you love to show off your husband like a prized trophy, only to keep him hidden until you need him again." "You bought yourself a husband, didn't you? How much did it cost you, Kelly? What did you pay for him?" Suddenly, I remembered my talk at the courthouse. James had asked me what I thought marriage meant, and I had answered the question poorly. Now I realized that my answer and Bev's insight explained everything. Bev stopped to count her stitches and then continued. "What you didn't do was love James as he is, the man who cared for you despite your faults with all his heart. Can you say you don't have any faults? That's the man who promised to love you on your wedding day. The same man who worked hard for long hours so you could go around being everyone's hero with your charitable work, all funded by his money, while showing off to your friends with expensive clothes and shiny things. You were just a young person dreaming about being married, nothing more. It made me feel sick. I wasn't sure I could keep going with this, and Beverly could see the pain on my face. It's not easy to face your true self. I've had to do it before, and I never like it. There's a dark side in all of us, Kelly. The trick is to know it's there and use it for good. If you let it take control, you might become a monster that ruins your own life. How did I not learn this? Was I not paying attention in school when they talked about our true selves? Did I not listen to Mom or Dad when they talked about important things?" Beverly giggled and then frowned when she dropped a stitch in her knitting. "Look what you made me do!" She went back to laughing like a silly old woman as she counted her stitches. It bothered me. She was making fun of my feelings, and she noticed. "Oh, come on, Kelly. What's done is done, and there's no going back. Look on the bright side. Your foolishness may have ruined your marriage, but it didn't end your life. You're still here to learn from your mistakes." I waited until Bev smiled, and then looked over her glasses at me. "There aren't any classes on how to understand yourself, Kelly. That's where your parents let you down. Your mom knows this, and so does your dad." "They wrapped you up too much." I shook my head. "I don't get what you mean." Beverly sighed dramatically. "I'm too old to teach you about life, but I feel like if you and your parents are going to get through this, I need to try." She focused back on her knitting and looked straight at me. "Your mom and dad wanted to give you a better life than they had. That's a good goal, but sometimes you need to struggle a bit to really value what you have." Beverly stopped knitting, rolled the yarn into a ball, and set it on the table next to her. "Want some advice from a silly old lady about marriage and family life?" I looked at Beverly and laughed. This woman might be old, but she was far from silly. "Yeah, in my view, listening to you is definitely a step up. Fire away!" We both laughed together. "When I was younger, much younger than you, families worked very differently. Back then, men ruled the house. What my father said was the law. My mom, my sisters, and I always listened to him. But don't get me wrong, I don't think that was better than today. It was just how things were. When I was old enough to marry and have kids, a few things began to change. Not by a lot, but it changed some. The Second World War helped women leave the house and join the workforce. That made it easier for women of your mom's time to seek equality. I think the birth control pill also changed how relationships and families worked. Beverly looked up at the sky. Why don't we go inside and make some tea? I think I've had enough sun for today. I put the kettle on while Beverly settled into one of her kitchen chairs. It's normal for us to want to give our kids a simpler life than we had. Your parents worked hard to send you to the best schools, buy you nice clothes, and create a life they didn't have. Beverly set the cups out, and I poured the water into the teapot. But what they didn't realize is that people usually don't value what they don't have to work for. If you give a child candy without them earning it, they'll expect it and throw a fit when they don't get it. Let them work for it, and they'll enjoy it more when they finally get it. I sat down and thought about my life so far. I couldn't remember a time when I didn't get what I asked for. If I asked for something, I received it. I turned to Beverly. I heard my grandmother say many times, "Spare the rod, spoil the child." I thought she was just a mean old lady who didn't like children. Now I see that perhaps she had a point. Beverly smiled as she rotated the teapot 6 times in one direction and then 6 back the other. Exactly, my dear. Not literally, but it means that you never had a chance to learn the hard lessons life has to offer. They wrapped you up in cotton wool and expected you to be good and get along with others. I frowned. What I did wasn't my mom's fault. I made my own choices. Beverly grinned. I'm glad you see that. But yes, it was your choice to let those bad influences lead you. Still, your parents share some blame for your problems, as does James. They let you believe you were owed things. They basically handed you a weapon without teaching you how to use it or understand the harm it could cause. I felt confused about what Beverly was trying to say, and she noticed it in my eyes. Think about the freedom and power you had. Have you heard the saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely? I shook my head. No, I haven't. It was first said by a man named Lord Acton in a letter in 1887. I shrugged, not really understanding what she meant. Beverly laughed. So, my dear, many women today are playing with power they don't understand. The girls now don't realize just how much power they have. They have taken power from men, but still keep the power that women have always had over them. Don't say that. It's not right. We know how a bare leg or a pretty smile can affect men. You told me before how your mother wanted you to be like a housewife from the 1920s, always cooking and not going outside. I remember when I complained about how my mom made me do all the boring house chores. It felt like punishment to me. Just look at what I'm wearing. I said this plainly. You could say that, but I was just trying to show you how your mom saw things and what she went through. She wants to show you how easy you had it when you were growing up, so that you will appreciate what you have. I sighed and said, I do appreciate what I had. The trouble is, I didn't see it back then. What do you mean by women playing with guns? Are you saying that women today don't deserve equal rights? If that's true, I would find it upsetting coming from a man and hard to understand coming from a woman. Bev sighed when she heard me. No, Kelly, I know it sounds that way, but that's not what I mean. Let me give you a history lesson about how men and women have related to each other throughout time. I shrugged. This talk was getting irritating, and I felt defensive as Bev kept talking. How about we break it down? Let's look at different time periods. My grandmother, my mother, me, your mother, and then you. This will show us how things have changed for women and men over 5 generations. It sounds simple enough for me. I was starting to get annoyed, and I needed to calm down. Beverly was sharp and frowned. Don't get snappy with me, young lady. I'm just trying to help you understand why you think the way you do. I suddenly felt embarrassed and apologized, sitting quietly, ready for my lesson. Bev continued, Okay, my mother grew up in my grandmother's time. Back then, men were the head of the family, and the law supported that. While it may seem bad, there were rules to protect wives, and while not perfect, it usually worked. Men were polite to women, and there were laws, both legal and moral, to stop husbands from abusing their power. Some men broke these rules, but most were taught from a young age to be respectful towards women. The saying, "Don't hit girls," was taught to boys. Young men learned that having power was a privilege. They weren't supposed to misuse it. Children were taught how to behave, although it was also about how to write some letters. But overall, men had the power and learned how to use it for the good of the community. Before you say it was unfair to husbands, yes, it was. But men also had responsibilities to their wives and daughters. You know how guys complain about how unfair the law is for fathers today. That started back when wives couldn't support themselves if there was a divorce. Girls didn't have ways to earn a living until they got married. They had no money or property to speak of, just a dowry meant to help them. But now, women have their own jobs and money to care for themselves. Courts don't punish for cheating like they used to, but if a husband is guilty, he gets blamed, even if he isn't at fault. If you were to divorce James without a prenuptial agreement, he would suffer for your cheating, not you. You would leave with half of what he earned during your marriage, though he did nothing wrong. Years ago, he wouldn't have needed a prenuptial agreement. You would have gotten blamed and been forced to leave. If there were kids, you wouldn't have gotten custody because of your actions. Women have gained benefits without facing consequences. I felt upset that I couldn't argue against what Bev was saying. My mother was born in 1895 and saw the start of the women's movement challenging men's authority. Women gained the right to vote, and things began to slowly change. I was born in 1925 and watched the start of World War II. That brought change quicker. Women had to work to provide supplies for the war. Afterward, many stayed in the workforce because there weren't enough men around to take their jobs back. I found myself really focused on Bev's history lesson, sipping my tea and concentrating hard. Up until my time, women were still treated with respect. Society had its rules. For example, men didn't curse around women. They held doors open and were polite. Yes, it can feel a bit belittling for women to be treated like they can't make it on their own, especially when we look at it with today's eyes. The point is that there were rules for how both men and women behaved. Now we're reaching your mother's time. Who was a baby boomer? Baby boomer? I asked, confused. Beverly laughed heartily. Yes, my dear. She's a product of the big changes after World War II in the 1950s. Before that, life was tough for 20 years. Your mother saw how hard her parents worked for what little they had. But when she was ready to marry and have kids, things got much better. This was when real feminism started to grow. With new birth control options, women began to work for themselves. Men's roles changed a lot because of this. Women no longer had to hold back men's feelings like they used to. In your mom's early days, women were taught to stay close to men to control their desires. There wasn't much birth control then, and abortion was something desperate women turned to, often with terrible results. If a woman got pregnant without being married, she was often judged harshly. Beverly paused to sip her tea and let me think about it. I asked, "So you're saying that even if we might disagree about how men and women were treated 100 years ago, there were rules to keep society from falling apart?" Bev nodded after putting her cup down. Every generation has its own ways to keep balance, but these rules take time to develop. Now let's talk about your generation. Changes for women have happened so fast that society is struggling to keep up. It's like selling a tool before you give instructions on how to use it. In my time, if a man got too close to a woman, people would call him unkind names and avoid him. Women who behaved badly were looked down upon, too. There were ideas that helped keep people in line. Today we have laws against harassment, but change comes slowly. I see women acting in ways that would have shocked people before. If a man behaved like some of these young women do now, he would be accused of harassment. In my day, those women would have been considered outcasts. Men don't know what's right or wrong anymore. Everyone is trying to be careful with words, but it's gone too far. They've lost the respect men used to have because women are still figuring out how to use their new power for good. Women have always had the skill to charm men into doing things, and now they don't need men for support as much as before. The rules for men don't always work for women because they think differently. Women today are like kids in a candy store without anyone to guide them. You're a good example of that. You feel like a queen, taking what you want without thinking of others. I was stunned by what she said, and Bev noticed my shocked face. Let me explain better. Not all women act this way. Most are responsible, but a few have fallen through the cracks of our old rules that don't fit anymore. Kelly, you were one of them. Society works when you give as much as you take, if not more. You took without giving. She then pointed to the box beside her knitting. People help me, and I give back as well. Why didn't you do the same? Tears filled my eyes and I felt a lump in my throat. I realized it was because I'd been selfish. Bev smiled gently. Maybe a little, Kelly, but more than that, you just weren't taught to use the strength you got from past generations to help everyone. People are naturally selfish. It's part of living together. We need to compromise between what we want and what is good for others. Most of the time, helping others brings you more help in return. Bev, being the wise woman she is, summed it up simply: look after those who help you. I left Beverly's that day with a lot on my mind. I needed time to think about everything she said and how it related to me. My thoughts were heavy when I went to bed, remembering my past actions. I felt disgusted as I began to understand how I had treated James, which made me angry and sad. Beverly had said it wasn't all my parents' fault, and maybe I should be frustrated, not for what they did, but for what they didn't do. Could it be that they acted in good faith without fully understanding their actions? I realized that no matter who I wanted to blame, I had to accept that other women, who grew up like me, made better choices. They figured it out. Why hadn't I? This truth felt heavy and unpleasant in my stomach. I was a selfish person, only thinking of my own needs. The responsibility was mine, and I saw that I was the only one who could change it. I must have dozed off because when I woke up, I heard footsteps, and there was no light coming in through the little basement window. I listened as Mom and Dad chatted happily about how nice the wedding was and how good James and Michelle looked together. Surprisingly, I didn't feel angry or sad about them talking this way. I stepped out from the basement and asked without any harshness, "Was it a nice wedding?" Mom and Dad looked at each other for a moment before Mom said, "Yes, Kelly, it was." James looked sharp in his tuxedo, and Michelle looked amazing in her wedding dress. "I know you don't like your father and me being friends with him." I raised my hand to stop her. "No, Mom, it's okay. You can be friends with James. He's a good man, and he was good for me. I truly hope he finds happiness with his new wife. I really mean it. Even though I felt sad about it, I found some comfort. I could congratulate James and Michelle without feeling angry." After a pause, Dad said the first words he had spoken to me since I came back home. "How was your day?" Tears filled my eyes, and I had a lump in my throat, but I didn't care. "I had a great day, Dad. It was very informative, and it keeps getting better." I wiped my face, feeling a bit choked up. "I'm sorry I don't have dinner ready. I wasn't sure when you two would be home." Dad looked at Mom and scratched the back of his neck, something he always did when he felt shy. "Don't worry. I'll order takeout," he mumbled as he headed to the kitchen. "Chinese food, is that okay with everyone?" Mom smiled and winked at me. "Yes, sweetheart. Chinese is just fine," she said. "Your father and I didn't eat much. I was too nervous, worried if everything would come together." In the end, the meal that night was the best I had ever had. I was part of the conversation, a lot of it about James and Michelle's wedding. I still felt a bit uneasy, but I managed to smile. Just before I drifted off to sleep, a sudden idea popped into my head and stuck there. The next afternoon, I was at Beverly's house. "Bev, can I ask you for a favor?" I said. "Sure, sweetheart. Just don't ask me to move too fast. I'd be happy to help," she replied. I smiled and asked, "Do you know anyone in the neighborhood who needs help? I'm looking to earn some money." Bev thought for a moment and pointed to a little address book next to her phone. "I was wondering when your money issues would start to bother you. Give me that book, Kelly. I think I know just who to ask." "What?" I asked, confused. Bev laughed. "Your money problems, dear. You've been broke since your divorce. I figured you'd want to fix that soon." I shook my head. "Why don't you just speak plainly? Did you eat a dictionary when you were little?" That made her laugh even more. "No, but think about it. What else does an old lady like me do but knit? I do crosswords to keep my mind sharp. There's an old saying, use it or lose it." An hour later, Bev had set me up with interviews with 6 busy housewives in the neighborhood. I started with 2 or 3 hours a day at each job. I set up a routine that let me handle 2 houses a day while still taking care of my own chores. The $10 an hour made a big difference. The thanks and compliments I got from the tired mothers were truly rewarding. I asked Bev not to tell my parents, and she said, "You better be doing this for good reasons, child." I smiled back. "You don't have to worry about that. It's something I need to do. It feels like making up for my mistakes. Like you're knitting, I want to do something good for others." Bev looked worried but said nothing. I knew I was keeping this project to myself. I wasn't sure if I could do it, and I didn't want the pressure of others knowing. It took 3 weeks of hard work before I saved enough money, just over $700. I used it to buy the materials I needed and took them to the basement. I read online about the technique needed for my idea. Even after all my research, I still didn't know if I could do it. It all relied on the last step, which was the most costly and could ruin everything. I worked diligently for hours, often into the late night. Mom asked me many times what I was doing, and I just smiled and said, "If it works out the way I want, you'll never know." I laughed at the puzzled look on her face and tried to reassure her it wasn't anything bad. I found a place that could do the final step, but they wanted more money than I had. They said they would start, and I could pay them later. This meant I had to work another 2 weeks to come up with the full amount. I finished the project and took the items for the last step. When I got them back, I couldn't believe how beautiful they looked. I was excited as I packed them up and wrapped them in white floral paper I knew Mom had. I added a nice white bow on top. Tonight's the night for my surprise delivery. A week later, after another day of working, I came home. I decided to pay my parents back for the money I borrowed for the detective agency. Having my own money felt good, and I didn't want to rely on my parents anymore. Mom was sitting in the living room. "Can I talk with you for a minute, Kelly?" I moved to a chair across from her, sat down, and handed her $250. She looked at the money and asked where I got it and what it was for. "It's to pay back the money you and Dad lent me for the detective agency. I've been cleaning houses for some working mothers in the neighborhood. I thought it was time to pay my way." My mom looked at me with a look I couldn't understand. "I'm proud of you, Kelly. You've made some good choices on your own, but there's still something you're hiding. Do you want to tell me, or is it still a big secret?" I shrugged my shoulders. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom. Did I do something to upset you? Not that I know of, but you've been really quiet lately. It makes me worry a bit. I need to know if you've done something." "What makes you think I've done anything?" I knew I was avoiding the topic. I knew I was caught, but I wasn't too worried. I just wanted to avoid any drama. "Kelly, listen. I'm not mad at you. I just want to know if you did this thing. If you did, why?" I sat there, head down, wondering how she found out. "What do you think you know? Maybe I can explain." My mom sighed. "Kelly, you have a way of driving me crazy. I was at James's today, and they got a wedding gift that just appeared on their doorstep last week. They've been trying to find out who sent it so they could thank them. It's a unique gift, so why do you think it was me? I didn't even go to the wedding. They wouldn't have wanted me there anyway. It's unlikely that I would send them a gift." "Come on, Kelly, I know it was you. I was hoping you'd tell me yourself." "I haven't said anything to James. I wanted to talk to you first. The wedding paper was special, and I know because James saved it. No one else had it. It had to be you, Kelly. You've been working really hard for the last month and a half. Now I get why. What I don't understand is why you did it." I took a moment to think, then decided to come clean. "Yes, Mom, it was me. Mrs. Pascoe and I talked, and I felt like I had to do it. I could have bought something traditional, something cheap, but that wouldn't have felt right. Mrs. Pascoe was making things for the church fair. She said it was her way of showing appreciation for the community. I played with my purse. She said giving something of yourself makes it special. I've never really given anything to anyone. I've always just taken. But now I know how good it feels to do something kind for someone, just because. I've always been good at art. I found the photos you had of James, Michelle, and the wedding party. Hand-painting the plates was tough. Firing the designs was the most expensive part, but I loved every moment of it." Mom just sat there looking at me. I asked, "Are you mad at me for doing this?" Mom came around the table, tears in her eyes, and hugged me tight. "No, sweetheart, not at all." She held me at arm's length to see my face. "But I think we should tell James and Michelle who sent the special gift. They think it's one of the best they've received." I looked up at Mom. They said they liked the way I painted the plates. I really tried hard to get their faces just right. James was easy, but Michelle was harder, especially her veil. I have a dozen messed up paintings in my room. If you need something to break for the next wedding, you're invited. Mom laughed. I'll remember that, sweetie. Now, what will we do about this little secret of yours? I shrugged sadly. I hadn't kept my gift a mystery for long. Do we have to say anything? I didn't want recognition or thanks. I did this for me. I guess I'm a bit selfish. I wanted to feel better about myself. I worry they might not like it once they find out it was me. They have every right, I guess. Mom didn't say anything more about the gift, at least not to anyone else. Dad was talking to me more lately. I felt good about starting over. I told Mom I handed her the money to finish paying my loan. All my debts are cleared, Mom. I think it's time I find my own place and pay my own way. Thank you and Dad for not giving up on me. There are parents who would have just kicked me out. Mom held me, crying happy and sad tears. I knew I wasn't the only one with tears in my eyes. I know I said some harsh things to you, Kelly. I didn't say them because I hated you. I said them because your choices hurt a lot of people and I felt responsible. I understood her sadness and held her until we both stopped crying. Dad helped me move into a small unit near the grocery store where I started working as a cashier. I still didn't have a car and buses were often late. My job did not pay much, so I kept doing some cleaning jobs too. It was enough to keep food on the table. Money didn't matter as much anymore. I hardly had time to go out and socialize. The truth is, I wasn't in the mood either. There were moments when I just needed to leave my apartment. Most of the time, I would head to my parents' home after helping out my neighbors with cleaning, or I would visit Beverly. She had gotten better after her hip surgery, and she often said I didn't need to help her anymore. I don't mind, Bev, honestly. I like spending time with you. If we can finish the chores quickly, we'll have more time to talk. Beverly shook her head and said, You shouldn't waste your time chatting with an old woman like me. You should be out having fun and meeting people your own age. I just smile and ask her for the latest news. I missed out on a lot of lessons when I was growing up, Beverly. I need to catch up now so I can make better choices in the future. Beverly knows a lot. I have learned many interesting things from her. Then my past caught up with me. I was just finishing work and walking out when I heard someone call my name. Haven't seen you in years. Is that you, Kelly? I looked up and saw Tracy Kenmore standing just a few feet away. My heart dropped. The last person I wanted to see was anyone from that group of friends, as James would say, bad influences. Hi, I said, feeling uneasy. Maybe we can avoid each other for another 10 or 20 years. Tracy frowned. That's unfair, Kelly. I wasn't part of your marriage problems. I left the group when I saw Carol was only using us. I tried to warn Sue. I told her Carol was trouble, but by then your mom had pulled you out of school, so I thought you were safe. What do you want, Tracy? I haven't talked to Sue in years, I said coldly. Tracy smiled and chuckled a little. I know where my sister is. She's gone to America chasing dreams in Las Vegas, according to Mom. She never really thought things through. I think she's not much smarter than Beth Favors. Want to grab a coffee? I hesitated, still unsure of her intentions. Okay, but you're paying. I'm on a budget. We sat together, chatting about simple things until Tracy asked the question I dreaded. Have you seen Carol or Pam lately? Anger surged through me and I snapped back. I already told you I haven't, and I don't want anything to do with them anymore. I've just made peace with my family. I don't want to mess it up. Tracy put her hands up like a shield. Calm down, Kelly. I'm not against you. What those women did to you was terrible. But you have to see that you also put yourself in their way. Tears started to fill my eyes again. I thought I had healed, but talking about it brought back the pain. It still hurts. I lost someone important because of them. I feel so foolish for believing what Carol said. Tracy looked at her cup before speaking again. Want to hear something funny? I raised an eyebrow. What could possibly be funny about those women? Tracy grinned. What if I told you that you and I are the only ones from that group living good lives? I looked at Tracy in surprise. Really? She nodded. Yes. My sister Susan is probably in a bad situation, and Beth lives in her own little world. I don't even know how she gets by. She hangs out with bikers and has so many tattoos you wouldn't believe it. She's not with Norm anymore. He's in prison for tax crimes. That's a lot, I said, trying to take it in. And here's the big news, Tracy continued. Pam is sick with AIDS and won't live much longer. I couldn't believe it. What happened to Chad? Chad didn't get sick because after he was injured, he let himself go. Pam stopped being with him. Now he spends his days looking for free handouts. Carol goes back and forth between jail for selling herself and the streets, trying to get money for drugs. She looks terrible now. No one had seen Mal since everything ended with James. I was shocked by all of this. I knew Carol used drugs sometimes, but I didn't think she would get so deeply involved. So you might think your life is tough, but I can tell you're doing better than any of them. You have a real job, a place to sleep, and friends who care about you. You're not doing too badly at all. I found a smile creeping in. What Tracy said was true. I usually focused on what I had lost instead of what I had regained. I guess you're right, Tracy. I'm lucky to have family that didn't give up on me. I thought I was alone for a long time, but I realize now it was me pushing them away. Tracy and I talked for a long time about our school days and what life had been like for us since then. I shared what I had been up to and how I was trying to fix my life. It turned out to be a nice afternoon. As we were chatting, I noticed Tracy was smiling. "Do you know a guy named Steve Duncan?" she asked. I thought for a moment. "Didn't he drive that American car?" "Yes, that's him. A black Trans Am, if I remember right. He got in trouble with someone for messing with a woman, and he ended up in the hospital for a few tough months. I heard that he wants to take things further. Be careful. Now he has just one testicle left. I think he was the one James grabbed to get into a party, then ran away afterward. I'm not surprised he got hurt. I always thought he was a bit too full of himself. What happened to his car?" "James said it was blocking his driveway, so he had it towed. I think it might be crushed now, but Steve couldn't come up with the cash to get it back from the police. A police officer named R. Hennessy saved it from being crushed. I asked who that was." Tracy nodded and said it was Senior Constable Ron Hinn. He seems to really care about classic American sports cars. He couldn't bear the thought of it turning into scrap metal. I just nodded and thought about how some people never learn from their mistakes. "So what about you? What are you doing these days?" "I'm a housewife and mom, and I love every minute of it. I got away from Carol and her group at just the right time. I met my husband, Jake, and we have 2 little boys, Thomas and Stephen, and a baby girl, Janelle. I love all of them so much, and they keep me busy." Then Tracy asked me a question. "Would you like to come to a barbecue and meet them?" I paused for a moment, and Tracy added, "I'll understand if you don't want to. I was just being silly and wanted to show off my family. Sorry if I upset you." I smiled. "That's not it. I'd love to meet your family, but I have a little problem. My mom sees you as part of Carol's group, and I'm not sure what she'll think if I say I've met with you. The last time I met someone from my past, it almost ruined things for my mom and dad, not to mention James and my marriage." Tracy patted my arm. "I understand, but if you really want to, you can bring your mom and dad with you. We can have a barbecue, and it will give me a chance to say sorry for some things I said to your mom back in school." I was surprised my mom didn't freak out when I told her about Tracy's invitation. "So, what do you think, Kelly?" "I don't have a problem with Tracy, as long as she doesn't try to mess with your head like Carol did. The fact that you came to me right away shows you're thinking about this the right way. How about we wait to see how the barbecue goes?" I felt relieved that I had made the right choice. I was finally getting over being called the Fool of the Year. It really does affect your confidence. The barbecue went well. Tracy said sorry for some terrible things she said when we were teenagers and tried to apologize for her sister's part in my marriage ending. Mom wouldn't allow it. You can't keep feeling bad for what your sister did. We spent the whole afternoon and evening playing with Thomas and Stephen. Mom got all mushy over Janelle. I admit she pulled at my heart, too, and I started feeling that warm feeling that gets to women when they hold babies. I kept my head down, and in 2 years, I found some good friends. They knew I didn't have much money, so when I left early from after-work drinks, they just waved and thanked me for coming. Tracy kept in touch. I think she liked having a dependable babysitter. She wouldn't hear of it when I said she didn't have to pay me. I tried to tell her that I loved playing with her kids. It frustrated her. When she found out I was using the money to buy things for her kids, I just laughed. I earned that money, just like you said, Trace. And since it's my money, I can spend it how I want. Tracy just shook her fist at me and smiled through her annoyance while I grinned. I worked my way up at my job until a new manager came in. Michael Kincaid was a nice enough guy, though he was a bit distant at times. Most of the staff got along with him, and he would chat with everyone most weeks. Even if it was just for 5 minutes, It helped us feel better during the workday. One thing that made me really happy was getting my own bank account and a credit card. When I applied, I was still living at home, so it was sent there. Mom called me at work to say I got mail, and when I opened the envelope, I just stared at it. Mom noticed. "Is something bothering you, dear?" I smiled. "No, Mom. I was just thinking about the last time I had a credit card." I looked over at her and sighed, then waved mine in front of me. James owned the last one. I just got to use it. I never worried about paying it off. No trouble with the banks if I spent too much. Mom could see my worried look. "This is all yours, dear. You'll need to be responsible for it." My dad surprised me when he jumped into the conversation. I hadn't seen him standing in the kitchen with a cold drink. "My advice, Kelly," he said while pointing at the card I was holding, "is to never charge anything you can't pay off at the end of the month. It may seem nice to not pay everything at once, but it will cost you a lot in interest later." I thought back to the talk I had with James about using credit cards. Beverly was right. I had married my husband and used my credit card carelessly. I made the minimum monthly payments, and just like Dad said, it cost me a lot for that mistake. I know, Dad. That's one lesson I will always remember. For the last 6 months, I've been doing sign writing on chalkboards for the vegetable section. The staff and customers at the store thought it was really fun to draw silly pictures of vegetables with funny speech bubbles, as if the veggies were trying to sell themselves. I felt proud of myself for using my drawing skills. I worked on these drawings during my lunch break or before and after my shifts. I wanted to add a personal touch to the supermarket, and it made me happy too. On an early Monday morning, Michael called me into his office. "Have a seat, Kelly. I'll be with you in a moment." I felt anxious about my job. Michael had let some workers go, and I worried I might be next since I didn't have many skills. It was hard to find another job. I always thought I worked hard, but maybe Michael saw it differently. I sat there, fidgeting, glancing around his office and looking at a folder on his desk. Michael nodded and then looked at me. "You have a great attendance record. The best here, in fact. You haven't missed a day or been late since you started. Your work ethics are commendable, Miss Garrett. I wish more employees were as responsible." I smiled, feeling a bit more at ease. "It's Miss Garrett. I'm divorced. I try my best." I didn't have a lot of skills in other areas, so I focused on doing my job well. It felt good to know that my hard work didn't go unnoticed. Michael raised his eyebrow as he put the folder down and sat back, lacing his fingers together. He looked deep in thought, which made me nervous. I felt like something unexpected was coming. "I'm sorry, Miss Garrett. I haven't fully reviewed your file yet. I just assumed you were married since you're around my age." He turned a bit red as he apologized. "I was talking to Ron the other day and learned that you have a talent for drawing." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "I must admit, your drawings add a nice touch to the boring produce tickets. How would you like to take on a project for the whole store? I spoke with the higher-ups, and they think it's a great idea. We want to see how customers react." I let out a sigh of relief and then smiled. "I would love to do that. It's really fun for me. Just let me know what you need, and I can make some designs after work." Michael thought about it for a moment. "No, I don't want to wait. I'm eager to see how this goes, and so is the head office. You can use Miss Wallace's old office to set up your own. Talk to Kathy for any art supplies, and you can start working right away." We spent about an hour discussing ideas. Michael didn't make any promises, but if I did well, I could move up from being a checkout worker. It wasn't that the job was unworthy, but it was often seen as a dead end for those without high ambitions. I was amazed. I never expected that my simple drawings would turn into a real job doing something I loved. On my way home, I wanted to share my news, so I hurried to my parents' house to tell my mom. She beamed with joy as I shared my good news. "That's wonderful, sweetheart, but it's what we've always said, Kelly." I sat back, still processing my luck. I knew my mom believed that those who are selfish not only hurt others, but hurt themselves, too. I brightened up and said, "The best part is that if this goes well, I could get a promotion and a better salary. I might finally afford a nicer place and maybe even a car." I shivered with excitement. Mom patted my arm to calm me down. "One step at a time, Kelly. I'm glad to see you have ambition. If your father and I can help in any way, just ask." I thought about what Mom said, remembering the last time I heard that phrase. I had rushed into things before, and it didn't end well. If I had known the truth about James not being with Michelle, I wouldn't have acted so foolishly. But even knowing that, it wouldn't have changed what happened. I realized I had ended my marriage long before that painful night when James caught me by surprise. I wished I had used my common sense and saved everyone from heartache. However, I also believed that if it wasn't for that tough experience, I wouldn't have learned anything from the end of my marriage. I promised myself I wouldn't make the same mistakes again. If my mom's smile was heartwarming, my dad's hug was unforgettable. Since my divorce, we had been getting along better than I ever expected. He had never really held me like that before, and I missed it. "I was wondering if we wasted our money on all those art classes you took in school," he said. "It's great to see our faith in you has paid off." "Maybe you can create a family portrait next," he added. "You never know. You might become famous one day." Here's a simpler version of your text. "We're about to see the first Kelly Garrett original." I laughed and nudged him on the arm. "I really doubt that, Dad, but thanks for cheering me on. Maybe for your next anniversary, I'll do a portrait of you and Mom." Bev was just as excited as my parents, but she had some advice, too. "It won't happen every time, Kelly. Some people might take advantage of your kindness. Remember, do things because you want to, not for a certain reason. If that reason doesn't work out, you might feel like nothing was gained. The main point of giving is to make yourself feel good inside. That way, even if people don't react the way you hoped, you can still feel satisfied with yourself. Anything good that comes after that is just a bonus." My life was finally getting back to normal. The last couple of years had been tough, but I learned to set my priorities straight. I don't think I could have made it without the love and determination of my family and friends. James was right. Without them, life can feel very lonely. I had seen James and Michelle a few times. I wanted to apologize to them, but I always backed out at the last minute. I sat outside their house many times, wishing I could just go in and say sorry for my past mistakes. In the end, I drove away each time thinking they didn't want to hear from me. My life moved on in a rough way. Some days were good, while others felt like I was going backward. Bev helped me during those hard times, saying, "It's all part of life. As long as you're moving forward most of the time, that's what matters." Where was this wise woman when I was a kid? Michael came into my office about 6 months after my promotion. I had more work to do now, not just in-house projects, but actual ads for things like leaflets, newspapers, and magazines. Someone at head office had figured out they could save money by hiring their own graphic designer instead of paying someone outside. This was a new challenge for me. It meant I had to take night classes to improve my computer graphics skills. Even though it was hard, I didn't want to let Michael down for giving me this chance. As the day was ending, he casually asked how I was doing. I looked up from my project. "I'm struggling with this latest design," I admitted, feeling a bit frustrated. "Something isn't right, but I can't figure out what." I returned to my work, examining every detail closely. Maybe it'd be smart to take a break until an idea comes to me. He smiled and said, "Why not join me for a drink?" I stood up to see him leaning against the door, arms crossed. I felt he was looking me over, and his grin told me I might be right. "Are you asking me out?" "What do you think is going to pop up?" I said, surprised at my own boldness. I hadn't flirted in a long time, and my cheeks turned red. Michael shrugged with a laugh. "If you want to call it that, sure, I just thought a drink could help you relax." He seemed at ease and didn't want to make me uncomfortable. "You spend too much time here. Just because you're on salary doesn't mean you need to work all the time." I smiled a little. "I do enjoy my work, Michael. I don't have much of a social life, so I need something to do." Michael laughed loudly. "Have you thought maybe the reason you don't have a social life is that you work too much?" I chuckled too. "Okay, you might have a point. Let's go. I'm not getting much done anyway." That was the first of many drinks we shared. I liked his humor and style. He never came on too strong, but I could tell he was interested in me. I felt a bit sad because he reminded me of James in some ways. The way he would lead me through a crowd, one arm out front and the other at my back, felt familiar. It made me feel safe, just like before. Even though they looked different, their personalities were so alike. I sensed Michael wanted more from our relationship, and I struggled with what to do. I asked Bev for her advice. She just laughed. "I have no idea, Kelly. This is your choice. Just think about two questions. Have you learned from your past? And have you made yourself suffer enough? Her words surprised me. You think I'm punishing myself? Bev smiled. Oh yes, you work too hard and don't go out much. When you're not working, you just stay home. What does that say about you? It's time to change. James isn't trying to hurt you. I doubt he wants you to be a lonely old woman working all the time. You've shown you can be a good person, so go out and enjoy life. Stop moping around. I didn't know how to answer her questions for sure. This version uses simpler language and breaks complex ideas into easier sentences while keeping the story engaging. I understood what she was saying, but it was hard for me to judge my own feelings. So I talked to my mom about it. Do you like Michael? I bit my lip. Yes, I think I do. I wasn't sure if it was because he was so similar to James or if it was something else. I wanted things to go further, but I remembered what happened with James. I was scared that I might mess up again. I didn't want that to happen to me or to anyone else. Mom hugged me tight. I don't think you'll make that mistake again, sweetheart, she said. You will make different mistakes, but I doubt they'll be as bad as that one. Michael and I dated for almost a year, and I felt more relaxed with him as each day went by at work. We talked like any other boss and employee when we were out together. At work, I enjoyed it whenever he held my hand in public when no one was watching, or whispered little secrets when there was no one around. It didn't feel too wild, but it made me feel a bit cheeky when I was with him. Some of the other girls at work often asked about when the wedding would happen. I would just smile and shrug. I don't even have an engagement ring yet. How would I know? For 6 months, Michael courted me in a very sweet way, and we flirted too. Finally, after a special evening together, I felt brave enough to ask him, "Do you want to come in for a drink?" I thought about staying with a guy like him, who was worth all the tough days, instead of going home to a lonely apartment. So, I joked, I guess you're leaving then. I waved my hand casually. Michael picked me up off the ground. I squealed in surprise and wrapped my arms around his neck. He was so strong. I felt so light in his arms. You are quite the tease, Miss Kelly Garrett, he said. Now that you've opened the door, I'm not going anywhere. Michael was gentle and caring. I felt embarrassed once I got my breath back. I'm sorry, Mike. It's been so long since I felt this attracted to a man. Michael smiled and waved it away. I thought I was really something, he joked. I pulled him closer and whispered, You have nothing to worry about. If you keep being like this, I'll be a very happy woman. Michael and I were very close. I felt amazing. This was nothing like the rough past I had. This was sweet and loving, and I admired how strong he was. The next day, when I went to Bev's place, she must have seen how happy I was. Well, look at you. What have you been up to? She grinned. You're glowing. I felt my face turn red as I realized how embarrassing it was to tell Bev I was back in a relationship. I said, Mike and I. Well, we. Bev held up her hand. No need to explain. I really don't care about that stuff anymore. I'm surprised it took him this long to win you over. Bev laughed at her joke. I stood there with a soft smile. Are you done laughing? Michael is far from helpless. He's the best partner I could hope for. Even a little better than James, but don't tell him I said that, I added. Bev finally calmed down and made tea. Okay, Kelly, I can tell you need to talk. You really have come a long way. Many people thought you were lost and wouldn't find happiness again. I nodded, remembering how tough it was at first. But look at you now. So what's bothering you? I think I'm in love. No, I know I'm in love, but that brings up worries. Michael has been hinting we should take our relationship further. I don't know what I'll do if he asks me. Bev frowned. Are you worried you'll mess up again? No, I said quickly, then added more softly. I mean, no, that's not it. I'm worried about what will happen if he finds out about my past. I'd feel like a fool again. I knew I could walk away now, and while it would hurt, it wouldn't be as painful as if I got deeper with him and he left because of what someone else said. Beverly poured our tea and thought for a moment. Do you really not trust Michael? I reflected for a moment. It's not that. I just fear what might happen if he hears it from someone else. It would feel like I tricked him, and that would hurt our relationship. I don't want my future relationship to be shadowed by my past. Bev sighed. So you need to tell him. I sipped my tea and looked at the roses on the table. No, I can't do that. I'll be tempted to make it sound better than it was. I need someone to explain everything to him, someone who can share all the details. Maybe you or Mom could do that. When I talked to Beth, we didn't figure much out, but she did agree that Michael needed to know what he was getting into. Once I got back home, I remembered Michael was coming over for dinner. I thought of something James said to me long ago. That made me hurry because I was running out of time. Oh no, I might not make it. I hurried around, taking off my clothes while checking on the roast in the oven. I found out that Michael loves roasts, especially pork with lots of crispy skin and applesauce. I peeked out and saw Michael pull into the visitors' parking lot. Yes, I thought to myself. I quickly went to the bedroom to check myself in the mirror. Everything looked good. As I passed the kitchen, I grabbed the last thing I needed before meeting Michael at the door. The doorbell rang. "It's open," I called out, but then a scary thought crossed my mind. What if he brought someone with him? I didn't have time to worry more as the door opened. Surprise! Michael stood there, surprised. I guess he would be, since I was on my knees at the front door. I was wearing nothing but stockings, hoping my smile looked playful. Wow, what a surprise! My heart raced, and I knew it was working. Michael glanced over his shoulder, realizing the door was open. Anyone could see me. We quickly shared a kiss right there. I grinned. "You liked it, right?" "Wow, woman," he said. "What's not to like? What did I do to deserve this?" I had heard that many men dream of such surprises. I wanted to see if that was true. It turned out it was. I felt happy knowing I had crossed one dream off my list. Not that I wouldn't want to do it again sometime. If you keep surprising me like this, I'll definitely make sure you won't forget those moments. Then I remembered something. "Will you tell your friends about what I did?" Michael looked at me shocked. "You must be kidding. Let me tell you something about men and their talks with friends. If you were just a casual fling, I'd brag about it. My friends would be so jealous. But no decent man would ever share anything like that about his girlfriend or wife. They'd think I was joking. Even if I could convince them it really happened, I'd worry they might not believe me. So from then on, it's better to stay quiet. I'd agree with my friends that we don't get enough while thinking to myself, tough luck, guys. I'm doing great here." I giggled because I was glad to have made Michael's day and thought, thanks, James. You were right again. I wasn't sure if Michael had planned this for a long time, but he caught me completely by surprise. I should have guessed something was up when he told me it was his turn to surprise me and asked me to dinner. He didn't go to the office that day, but I thought nothing of it when he called to say he had some last-minute things to do and asked if I could come over before dinner. I knocked on his door around 7. When it opened, he looked very smart. His aftershave made me feel happy and lightheaded. He took my hand and said, "Step this way, my lady. Dinner will be ready soon." I could hear soft romantic music playing, and the lights were low with candles around the room. He led me to the dining room and handed me a glass of wine. The table had 2 candles lit, showing that we weren't going out as I first thought. There was a single long-stemmed rose on my placemat, which was a bit cheesy, but sweet. "This is amazing, Mike. Did you do all this for me?" I asked. He looked around as if checking the room. "I don't see any other woman here, so it must be for the one I love." I just playfully hit his arm. "You know what I mean. This is lovely. I don't know what to say. How about you dance with me while you think of the right words?" Michael led me into the lounge room where he had cleared some space. It felt like a dream come true as he held me close. I felt so relaxed and happy. I didn't want the moment to end. We danced for a while until Michael suggested we eat. I thought we might need some energy for the rest of the evening. I was amazed by the fettuccine carbonara he made. "I hope you like it," he said. "It's the only thing I can cook that's actually tasty." "We have wine trifle for dessert," he added with a silly grin. I shook my head, laughing. We finished eating, shared a few more dances, and sat on the couch, sharing sweet moments together. The whole evening felt wonderfully romantic. I couldn't have asked for more. It was truly special, right down to the sweet nothings whispered while we danced. I could tell something was bothering him as we sat there looking into each other's eyes, and I started to feel worried, too. Then he did what I feared the most during this lovely evening. He got down on one knee and asked the question I dreaded the most. "Miss Kelly Garrett, will you marry me?" The look on his face and the way he nervously fiddled with the ring broke my heart, and tears started to flow. His confused and sad expression made it even harder, and all I could do was sit and cry. Michael held me tight, saying nothing but comforting me, letting me know everything would be okay. "I understand if you're not ready to marry right now," he said, trailing off, unsure of what else to say. When I finally calmed down, I knew I had to help him understand why I hesitated to accept his kind offer. I stood up, took out a pen and paper from my purse, and wrote down an address. I handed it to Michael, sniffling. "There's something important about me you need to know." Michael put his finger on my lips to hush me. "The only thing I need to know is if you love me as much as I love you." I shook my head, pushing his finger away. "This evening has been amazing. I love you more than you realize. In a perfect world, that would be enough. But I'm not perfect. I have done terrible things in my past, things I'm ashamed of." I grabbed a tissue from a box nearby and wiped my eyes. "My nightmares will stay with me for a long time. Before you ask me to marry you again, and I hope you do, you need to speak to this person." I paused for a moment, knowing I couldn't explain everything correctly. "I believe this person will tell you the truth. Talk to them, and then come back to me if you still want this." Michael looked at the address for a long time before putting it in his pocket. "I can't see how anything will change my mind, but if this is what you want, Kelly, I will do it." I managed a sad smile. It's not what I want, but it's what needs to happen. I couldn't live with anything else. The next day I got a text. "Carrie's Cafe in the mall, tomorrow at noon. We need to talk." Just seeing that message made me shudder. It didn't seem threatening, but it felt uneasy. I was sitting, sipping my coffee, when a familiar voice broke my thoughts. "Why did you send him to me, Kelly? Why not someone else? Someone who might say things differently?" I stiffened at the sound of that voice, one I hadn't heard in years. Without turning around, I replied, "Because you're the only one who could make Michael understand how bad I was, James. Anyone else would hold back. You're not a cruel person, James. I trust you will tell the truth, even if it hurts. I hope you do." James sat across from me, silent until a waitress came to take his order. I told him everything, honestly. I explained how he was and how he messed with our marriage. I shared all the details, leaving nothing out, even what happened with Pamela and Chadwick. James looked straight at me. "Every little detail, Kelly." There was no anger in his voice, just facts. I wasn't sure if he believed me, but he listened well. I felt scared about what I had done. Tears filled my eyes as James stared off into the mall. "Thank you, James. I appreciate your honesty. I don't know where this will go next, but at least it's out in the open now. I will handle it from here." We sat quietly for a long time, both not knowing what to say until James stood up to leave. Before he went, I needed to say something. "I'm sorry for what I did to us, James." He looked at me closely but didn't respond, just waiting. "I know I've said it so many times, but now I truly understand why I'm sorry." James rubbed his ear as if he was deciding what to say. Finally, he spoke. "That guy is probably as big a fool as you are, so you should get along well." He said this casually and smiled, which lifted my spirits. "I forgive you, Kelly." My eyes welled up as he got ready to leave. Then he paused with a cheeky grin. "Mickey says thanks for the wedding gift. It was a unique present." I smiled and wiped my tears. "No problem. I enjoyed making the plates. Did your mom tell you?" James chuckled and shook his head. "Nope, you just did. Someday you'll learn to keep quiet." He added, "We asked everyone at our wedding and no one knew anything about it. When talking to Mickey, I remembered you were great in our school classes, so I figured it out." I laughed, shaking my head. "I could never fool you, could I, James? Did Michelle really like them?" James winked. "You bet she did. Your mom has kept us up to date on your recovery. Mickey has wanted me to thank you for a while, but I wasn't sure if you wanted that. For what it's worth, I believe you have changed for the better. I told him you have been working hard to fix your past mistakes. You went back to the basics just like I thought. I told him, to me, you're as clean as a whistle." "Come on, Mickey. What's up with you, James? This isn't like you." James shrugged. "I still prefer to be called James, but it doesn't bother me as much now. You're not the only one who needed to clear their head. If you can do it, so can I. I laughed as James finally got up to go. Don't be a stranger. Come over sometime. Mickey has a china cabinet he wants to show you. As he walked away, he called back, You owe me, Kelly. You keep charging things to my credit cards. Oh, and Mickey and Sarah think your clothes are really cool. But seriously, pay your debt. Don't let the $5,000 I spent on that china cabinet go to waste. He put his hands in his pockets and blended into the crowd. I pay all my debts, but now I'm stuck with your coffee bill. The coffee you asked me to, I shouted after him. People around me frowned at my big smile. I was giggling. I could see him laughing hard, his head back and shoulders shaking. I just shook my head. At least Michelle and Sarah got to wear all those clothes I bought on James's credit card before he kicked me out. That's when I remembered Beverly saying, Never do anything for just one reason. I took a chance to feel better, hoping it would be good for me, but I didn't expect much. Now I see my gift had two benefits. Beverly is really smart. My coffee date with James was on Saturday. I was nervous all weekend, waiting for the phone to ring or the doorbell to sound. I somehow made it to Monday morning. I was sitting at my work table, trying to finish my latest design. My elbows were on the table and my head was in my hands. I just couldn't focus. Do you have a gambling problem too, Kelly? I looked up to see Michael leaning against my office door, arms crossed. It took my brain a moment to understand his question. Do you always lean against doors when you ask dumb questions? I sighed. For what it's worth, no. Not that I know of. My face didn't show the whirl of feelings inside me. My heart felt like it was racing and I could feel my pulse. I was worried about what Michael would say after my meeting with James. Now he was here. You took a huge risk. I nodded. I know, but it was that or hope you'd never find out. I couldn't take that chance. Well, now there's a chance I might lose you. I'd never keep you if I hadn't set it up for you to talk to James. If anyone could tell you the truth, it was him. Everyone else would have sugarcoated what I'd done. I was dying inside, wanting to know what Michael thought. One thing I learned from my marriage to James was that my lies and disrespect were why it fell apart. Everything else was just a result of those two mistakes. I felt like I was burning in my seat. I wanted to get up, run to him, and beg him not to leave me. But I also wanted to turn away so I wouldn't see the disgust that might show on his handsome face. So where does this leave us? I'm done with lying, done with using people. Michael frowned, so I explained. Everyone uses someone at some point, Mike. It's okay unless you do it for selfish reasons. You kept me in the dark the other night when you popped the question. You made it seem like just another dinner. It wasn't for selfish reasons, so it was fine. He nodded, understanding without saying more. I've learned a hard lesson thanks to my first marriage. Fate has given me a second chance. I thought I knew love, but I didn't. I was just in love with the idea of love. I need the man I truly love to know the complete truth. My heart sank as I waited for his response. James isn't the brightest guy, you know. I nodded, wishing he would just say what he meant. Yeah, I suppose. He said the same about you, but if you saw his wife, you might think differently. I remembered seeing a blonde and a redhead. Which one is he with? I grinned slyly. Both, from what I hear. The blonde is Michelle, his wife. The redhead is Sarah, their friend. I leaned back in my chair. Doesn't look so stupid now, does he? Michael laughed, and I pressed him again. I need to know where this leaves us. You haven't answered my question. Yes, I did. I told you why I sent you to James. No, I mean my other question. Will you marry me? I rushed up, surprised, and bumped my hip against the desk. I was crying hard as I threw myself into Michael's arms. I want nothing more than to marry you, Mike. I will love you with all my heart. I promise I'll never lie to you. I won't disrespect you ever again. I will cherish you. Michael held me back and looked into my tear-stained face. That last part isn't necessary. Just love me. I hugged him again, tears of joy streaming down my face. I had finally started to feel like a new person. I had faced my past and felt good about it. Michael and I stood there, waiting for the next chapter to begin. Michael didn't say much about today. He only mentioned that James had called him to invite me over to see the cabinet and have a barbecue after. He said he wanted to introduce me to some people but didn't give any details. I felt nervous, like I was going on my first date, and Michael noticed. Don't worry, he said. It's just a barbecue, not a big deal. That's easy for you to say, I replied. You haven't faced Michelle's sharp comments before. She makes my mom sound really nice. I still remembered how rattled I felt after our last meeting. When the door opened, I stood still as if time had stopped. Kelly, Michael, it's so nice to see you, Michelle said, stepping aside to let us in. She looked stunning, tall and graceful. I felt small standing next to her and a bit intimidated. As we walked through the living room, I stopped and gasped. The huge china cabinet took up an entire wall, just like James had described. It was beautiful and made of solid wood, not the cheap stuff. The glass doors made it shine. It's lovely, I said, admiring the wood carvings. It suits the room perfectly. My eyes were drawn to the plates inside, especially one that was a big serving plate of James and Michelle together. That was the one I thought of as my special gift to them. All around it were smaller plates, some of just James and Michelle and others with our parents. I was amazed and speechless. I want to thank you for the wedding gift, Michelle said, her eyes shining. I was so touched to find out it was from you. A gift from the heart means so much more than something bought in a store. It shows love and thought. I love sitting here and looking at it. Sometimes I feel guilty for what I said to you back at the courthouse. I wiped my eyes. Please don't feel that way, Michelle. You were right. I needed to hear it. Thank you for making me see things clearly. Michelle smiled and touched my shoulder. Now everyone knows who sent the plate. Our friends were curious about the mystery giver. Now, let's go outside and I'll introduce you to everyone, she said. When we stepped outside, people cheered and shouted, "Congratulations!" I was shocked. I thought I would know no one except James and Michelle, and I barely knew them after our first meeting. Michael grinned at me. You wanted an engagement party, so here it is. I was stunned looking at Michael's happy face. Engagement? This is all new to me. James appeared, grinning widely. He came over, hugged me, and kissed my cheek. Congrats on making such a great catch. Welcome back from your long trip. I felt embarrassed as everyone looked at me. I glanced back at Michael, worried about what he might think, but his smile was still there. Thanks, James. That means a lot, I said shyly. James shook Michael's hand. You're crazy for letting her get away. Maybe you'll be better at keeping her in line than I was, Michael replied with a chuckle. You'd have to be pretty simple not to appreciate her. My head was spinning with all the emotions. I felt lightheaded and sat down as Michael and James went to get drinks, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Michael's voice faded in the background as he talked to James about something funny. I realized James was the last person Michael would be worried about. They both gave off that friendly vibe. Looks like I won't win every argument now, I thought. But it didn't matter. As long as we loved each other, that was what counted. Soon, my mom and dad came over, and I had a feeling they were invited, too. Michael returned with a wine in one hand and a beer in the other. Mom and Dad hugged me and congratulated us on our future marriage. Dad shook Michael's hand and joked, Don't get too comfortable with this, Kelly. This is the last time I walk you down the aisle. If you want to get married again, you can hire someone else. He winked at Michael with a smile, showing he was joking in a good way. I promised Dad this one would be the last if I had anything to say about it. Mom winked at me and pulled Dad away, reminding him it was important to get it right this time. If I hadn't gone for a third wedding, I wouldn't have married you again. Their voices faded as I turned back to my friends who were congratulating us. My work friends wanted to see my engagement ring. I showed it off with pride. I was amazed at how everyone kept this surprise from me. Beverly winked at me and let out her usual laugh. It's the first time I've seen you speechless and happy. I smiled, confused. Is everyone a little strange today? Laughter filled the room. Well, sorry if I'm still getting used to the fact that my Michael asked me to marry him. Then I remembered something. Mike, you looked like you had something to ask me at the front door. What was it? I already knew what it was. Michael scratched his head, looking a bit shy, and I felt nervous. He had looked bashful when I said it, and now I was putting him on the spot. I hoped he wouldn't feel bad about it. He asked anyway, What does maladroit vituperation mean? I looked around and noticed none of my friends seemed to know either. I could see relief on Michael's face that he wasn't the only one who didn't understand. I glanced at Beverly, who was laughing, but she could read me like a book. "You have a secret reason for asking, Kelly." I smiled and nodded. I didn't know what it meant either. I felt silly for not knowing. It's not a common phrase, and I let it slip at the front door, making it awkward for Mike. "You're the crossword expert, so tell everyone what it means." Everyone turned to Beverly and waited. She smiled and shook her head, saying, "Now you're making me look bad." Then she explained, "Maladroit means lacking skill, awkward and clumsy. Vituperation is name-calling or insulting. Put together, it's about poorly saying something mean." Michael smiled, and I had to add, "Please don't tell Mom I said it." He burst out laughing while everyone stared, confused. Then Thomas and Stephen ran up and jumped on my lap, yelling, "Happy engagement!" Suddenly Steve frowned and tried to ask, "What is engagement?" Tracy leaned down and whispered to him, and his eyes widened. "Oh, yucky! That's never happened!" He jumped off my lap and ran into the crowd while everyone laughed. I watched my friends for hours, remembering the parties I made James go to. This was different. People were laughing and chatting naturally, moving between groups, and everyone felt included. This was what James had wanted me to see. This was real friendship among our friends. No gossip or secrets. Even people I thought were just James's friends were happy to meet me now. Then I heard James's dad say something surprising. "You know, Marcy, you once said James traded a lemon for 2 peaches. It seems that sour lemon turned into sweet lemonade." I looked at my mom, who smiled back. "Yes, Graham, I think you're right. She just needed to find the right recipe." I walked away, feeling good. That recipe took a lot of pain and tears to discover, but now I know it will stick with me forever. As I lay in my wedding bed, my wonderful husband wrapped his arms around me. I felt peaceful and happy like never before. I realized I was no longer tied to my old life with James, but was embracing what real marriage felt like. We fell asleep together, and I whispered, "Love me for life, and I will give you back even more love. I'll make sure your wishes come true." As sleep came, I remembered something Beverly used to say. When you help others, you often get back even more help. I now see that loving someone returns even more love. Michael pulled me close and kissed my forehead. "You don't need to worry, my love. I can see us getting old together, with grandkids around us." I slept soundly in the arms of my loving husband. What more could a woman want? Michael and I now have a boy named Michael James and a girl named Sarah Michelle. He let me choose both names. I lost James as a husband, but gained him back as a brother-in-law. Mom and Dad really took to Michelle like she was their own daughter, since she doesn't have any family. After Dad walked us both down the aisle, me twice actually, it felt natural that we became close. Now we act like sisters. That means we sometimes have silly fights and call each other funny names when we argue. Michelle doesn't scare me anymore, but I respect her a lot. She told me that while she could have kids, something was wrong, so she couldn't have her own. She joked about it, saying there must be something wrong with her if she's not perfect. I just smile and shake my head. Sarah helped out by offering to carry a baby for Michelle. Sarah used her womb to carry the babies made from Michelle's eggs and James's sperm. She gave birth to twins, 1 boy and 1 girl. Everyone thought it was very kind of Sarah, and now she is the favorite aunt to all our kids. This also brought Sarah, Michelle, and James closer together, making them a family of their own, along with Trace and her kids. Camping trips are a lot of fun with 13 of us, and it gets to 16 when Mom, Dad, and Sarah join in. We play, laugh, and just enjoy being together like good friends and family do. I don't really know or care about what happened to the others. I know some might think this is selfish, but I don't mind. I finally have what I always wanted: a wonderful husband, a lovely family, and great friends.